Welcome everyone to the second session of Headless Development User Group with Sitecore. My name is Martin Miles, and we are running great speakers today again. I want to highlight that the recording of the first session is available on YouTube. It also is distributed through Telegram, through the Headless channel. And this recording will first get to Telegram channel like immediately after the recording, and then once I find time for processing it, I will publish it also to YouTube. So you may find the link to it in chat. And with that in mind, let me introduce Jason Wilkerson, who will say and present a topic about Headless SXA. And I'd better pass control to Jason so that he can introduce it.
All right, so wanted to say thanks to everybody for joining the user group tonight. Really appreciate that. Tonight we're going to be talking about SXA and headless. We're going to talk about I've been doing SXA for quite a while now, but it's all naturally it's all been MVC based, server side based, and with seemingly the entire world going to headless, including Sitecore, figured it was time to start kind of digging in. So we'll be talking about kind of some learnings that I've had as I've kind of started my transition. Started learning more about headless SXA versus and how that compares to the SXA, what I call classic SXA. And I do have a client that we are migrating from SXA MVC to headless. So this will be some of the things that I've kind of picked up along the way. So before I get started, to start with, I want to go down a little bit of a history lesson. So do you remember the days when we used to be able to, when we used to write server-side code down in our mom's basement, the good old days? Those were fun days. I have fond memories of those days. The days when, the days when Microsoft was kind of the biggest player in the market. Everything was Visual Studio, everything was .NET. Everything was PC based. These were good days when Microsoft was one of the bigger players. Servers were our friends. Servers were pretty expensive pieces of machinery with blinking lights and they big fans, and they were cool things. You get a bunch of them, you stick them in a rack, and it just looks all nice and tidy and neat. Servers were our friends. We got to hang out with them a lot in the server rooms, kind of hang out and things. We would try to protect them as best we could, keeping food and drinks out of, away from them and things like that. And we'd also try to keep them, safe from, like fires and stuff. And if you were, super nerd, you might take even selfies with the servers and share them on social media, something like that. But back in those days, life worked as it should. You made a request to the server did all the work, and then it sent you back a response. Life was good. Life worked the way it was supposed to. We were happy. These were the good days. Well, but then something happened. There was trouble on the horizon. Apple computers started showing up. Macs started showing up everywhere. And then coffee shops started popping up on every corner. And then what do you get when you combine an Apple computer and a coffee shop? What do you get when you put those two things together? Hipsters. You get hipsters and their skinny jeans. I mean, it was pretty much a choose your own adventure of hell with all the combinations of things. It was so But then you get all these hipsters start showing up. So what happens when you combine hipsters and code? What do you get then? JavaScript frameworks. You get all these front-end frameworks. And this makes us old-timer server-side guys sad. We liked the way the world worked before. But if you look on the bright side, it is an opportunity for us to learn something new. So now I will start with a disclaimer. I am almost a get off my lawn type server-side guy. I'm not a hipster, and I don't intend to go full hipster. But I am learning these things. I am not an expert in Next.JS. I'm not even an expert in Headless SXA, really. A lot of the concepts are the same between headless and server-side, but there are a lot of differences there. But I am not an expert in these areas, but what I'm going to be sharing today is my experiences and the things that I've learned along the way, along the path to me becoming partial hipster, not going full hipster. So you may be asking yourself, why do we even want to bother with this? Our life is good on, using server-side code. Our realms of expertise are in .NET, and that's what we know. So why do we want to make this shift in the first place? Well, for all intents and purposes, and Sitecore won't admit this publicly, but XP is dead. Let's just all kind of put that out there. That's not an official stance. Sitecore does officially continue to state that they will continue to support XP, and it will be around for a while because there's still a market for it. But they do, some unofficial statements I've heard them say that XP is considered feature complete. It is a complete product, a complete marketing product. So you're not going to see the kind of innovation on XP that you would see that you're seeing currently out of all the composable products that Sitecore has available. So there's just not going to be that. I mean, sure, there's going to be changes to XP. They're probably going to be adding in hooks for some of the new composable products that they have coming out. But it's, for all intents and purposes, you're not going to get the innovation to XP. You're going to be stuck with Experience Editor. There is no horizon. Pages is not coming to XP or XM. You're stuck with Experience Editor. That's what it's going to be. So this is one of the reasons that we probably want to consider this shift. Plus, you want to be a hipster, right? Because hipsters are supposedly the cool kids now. I don't know. You get to move your code from on-prem to the cloud, or as it's often referred to, someone else's computer. So you don't have to do a lot of the management of the physical infrastructure, at least. So that's another plus. But let's be honest, it's shiny new tech, right? Of course we're going to migrate. It's the new thing. We're going to jump all over that. So of course we're going to make this change. So you might be asking yourself, how is it actually different? How is it different between the server-side SXA, classic SXA, and headless SXA? That's kind of what we're going to be talking about. And so one of the biggest questions I had when I started down this path is I wondered, how is this going to change my daily life? How is headless going to make my workday different than what I know today, than what I know and I love? What are the differences? So that's what we'll talk about today, is what's going to, some of the things we'll talk about is what's going to change in your daily life. So obviously, a big difference is the fact that, classic SXA runs on .NET MVC, it is server side, and headless obviously does not. It runs on Next.JS. So this is, the first difference. It's kind of a big one. Some of the other key differences are rendering variants are still around. They are, luckily, and I would argue that rendering variants are probably one of the most powerful features of SXA. But the concept of rendering variants did live on in headless. They're different now, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. They are different now, but they do still exist, and that concept does still live on. There are fewer out-of-the-box components. Depending on what sales rep you talk to, classic SXA might come out of the box with anywhere from 70 to 170 components out of the box, depending on how close they were to the end of the month. So there are substantially fewer. I mean, headless SXA, I think, comes with on the order of 12 to 14 components out of the box, I believe. But that's not a bad thing, because I mean, who really used all the map components anyway? I mean, come on, they're just, I mean, it was cool that they were there, but the most important components, the ones that were used the most, did make the move. So while there are fewer out of the box components in headless, the most important ones still are around. SXA theming is different. You no longer, because we are headless now, all of your styles and your themes and all of your styling is going to be part of your head app. It's not going to be content managed like it has been historically. It's not going to be something where you can just in the content management server change the theme of a site and then all of a sudden everything changes. So there is no SXA theming in headless, which is that that's not a bad thing either. It reduces some of the complexity. And of course, there are some other differences also. Infrastructure is going to be different. Your deployments are going to be different, etc. So, there are some other ones, but here's a few of the key differences. So I had talked about, I had mentioned earlier that we're going to be talking about what's going to make your life different in your day-to-day work. And one of those things is going to be creating new components. What does that look like in the headless world? How is that different between classic SXA and headless? So and there'll be a couple of sections like this, and the way we'll do it is we'll first start off with talking about how we do it today in MVC, and then we'll go and talk about how that is now different in headless. So here we'll start off with MVC, and most people, if you're familiar with SXA, this will be all kind of familiar to you. But in the MVC world, the first thing we're going to do is when we create a new component is we're going to scaffold it up. So we right-click on our renderings, click on Insert, and click a component, and then we get a dialog to make some selections. In this case, we're going to be creating a component called a hero banner. We'll create a hero banner in MVC, and then in just a few minutes, we'll create a hero banner in headless to see how those are different. But here you get the dialog for creating the new SXA component. So we'll call this one hero banner. We'll add it to our module. So you do still have the concept of modules in SXA and headless. I mean, because it is that is still part of it. But you want to keep your headless components and your MVC components in separate modules. So here I've got one called I've got a module called SugCon, and I believe the headless one is SugCon headless or something like that. So I'm going to add this to the SugCon media feature, and I'll give it a CSS class, and then I'll point it to a path to our rendering. And when you do this, you will it will create your templates for you. And what I usually like to do is I usually reorganize those a bit, maybe rename them some. So I'm gonna kind of reorganize them just a bit. But the next thing up is going to be the hero banner. The next thing up is changing up some. We're going to specify the fields for the hero banner template. So it's going to be a pretty simple template. We're going to have an image and text, some text that overlays the image. It's going to be pretty simple. So here we've got our template fields. We're going to make sure we configure our insert options for our new component, and then make sure we've got our base template set up for our rendering parameters and things. So we'll do all that. The next thing up is we get into the nice juicy server-side code. Not that it's going to be all that juicy because it's a pretty simple component, but at least it's nice, comfy, cozy .NET code. So first off, we're going to do is we're going to create a model that's based off of our data template. Then we're going to create the interface for our repository. And this is just a simple implementation of the repository for the hero banner. Just for this quick example, we do use Link Manager to get the path to, or the Media Manager, I'm sorry, to get the path for the banner image. And then we put the text from the data source item into the banner text field, and we return that. Next up, we're going to create our controller. So this is the MVC controller. This is all pretty boilerplatey stuff in here, but this is kind of your basic standard SXA MVC controller. Then we're going to register those services with the container so that they get returned upon request. Next up is the view. So the view here this is our Razor view. So this is the markup that we're going to use, and it includes the helper fields for specifying the banner text and then accessing the image URL and things for the background image. So to take a little mental snapshot of this, that you'll see this markup in a few minutes too, but this is the markup for it. So this is the view. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to patch in our the registration of our services. We're going to patch those in through config. Now we're going to go back to Sitecore after we've deployed that .NET code. We're going to go back to Sitecore, and we are going to configure. We're going to replace some of the default values that came with the controller rendering itself. We'll start by specifying our new hero banner controller in the controller field. We'll also update the data source location and data source template and point those to the proper place. And then we'll go in and add our in our data in this place, we're adding the new rendering to the renderings item, so we can have that available in the toolbox. Next up, we're going to create add our data folder to /data, and we'll call that hero banner. So this will be where you would place shared data source items for various hero banners that you might use across your site. So we've done all that. Then we're going to sprinkle in just a little bit of the hipster magic and render our site, and this is what we get. We have here our MVC site is running, and we have our hero banner. So it's got a background image that we specified, and it's got some overlay text. So pretty simple, but that's the way we would typically create a component in MVC. Now that was nice, wasn't it? That was nice and comfortable. Everybody knew what we were doing. If something went wrong, we knew how to troubleshoot it. We weren't trying to understand, some silly JavaScript stack traces in the browser that don't really actually tell you anything. But that was nice and comfortable. But how would the hipster do this? How would they implement this hero banner in a headless world? So let's start with that. Let's talk about that. How would we create the new hero banner in headless? Well, you can start from scratch, kind of like we did with our MVC component, or Now, this is an unofficial quote that I got from an insider at Sitecore once, but one thing you can do is you can clone a component. That cloning is still available, just like it is in MVC. And this unofficial top secret person said that every component should be a clone. If you need a data source item, then go clone promo. If you want something that's got something to do with page context, then go clone page context. So that's what we're going to do in this example. We're going to actually clone the promo component from Headless. So we would right click on the promo component, go to scripts, clone the rendering, and then it's going to pop up a similar dialogue that we saw earlier. We're going to call this one hero banner as well. And you'll notice this is going into a SUGCON headless module. So we're keeping the server-based and the headless modules in separate modules, or components in separate modules. And then next up, we have, when you clone a component, you have the opportunity to select what to do with things like the data source item or the rendering parameters or the view or things like that. One of the things you can do is you can copy that data source template, make a copy of it, and then you can go remove fields or rename fields or something like that. That's an option. Or you can inherit from the existing data source template. That's an option if you want to use all of those original fields and then add some. So in this case, we're just going to make a copy of the rendering parameters, because promo, I think, comes with, I don't know, 5 or 6 fields or more, something like that. We're only going to use 2. So at this point, we're going to make a copy of the original rendering parameters. And then what that's going to do is that's going to create our template for us, or create all of our template items for us. And then I'm going to go and modify that a little bit. I'm going to go, my OCD takes over. So I'm going to go rearrange some of those templates. I'm going to add in my banner image and banner text fields that I'm going to be using. So that's the Sitecore item side of things. Now, for the JSS component itself, the React or the Next.JS component, you have an option. You can use the CLI and say JSS scaffold hero banner, and you provided the name of your new component called hero banner. You can do that, and then it will create your new TSX file for you, and it will create a kind of a basic boilerplated template of a component for you, and then you can go modify it. So you can do it that way, and it will place it in the /source/components folder. Or if you want it to go somewhere else in your hierarchy, say you're organizing your components a little different, you can do JSS space scaffold space and then provide a path to the component. So you can have it in a subdirectory of /components if you want. So you can do it that way, or you can just copy paste, kind of the easier way. So that's what we're going to do in this case. We're going to copy the promo React component and rename it to hero banner. And in this screenshot here, this is actually a single file. I just kind of broke up the screenshots into 2 pieces so that it fit better on the screen and wasn't quite so eye-charty. But this is the React component for your headless implementation. So you see you've got your interface of fields. That's going to be the fields from your data source item. You've got your hero banner props. That is going to be the collection of fields from your data source item, as well as the rendering parameters. And then you've got under default here on the right-hand side, you've got your actual implementation of the component itself. Now, default, we'll see that again in the export const default. We'll see that again in a minute. But this is a typical implementation of React component for JSS. Now, this markup, I had you earlier kind of remember, take a little mental snapshot of what that looked like, because this is effectively the same markup that we used in the Razor view. We just are now using Next.JS style syntax rather than Razor syntax. But in here, we display, we've got a div that's got a background image, and then we've got a div that holds our text field that's got the content from the banner text field on our data source. So this is your React component for the hero banner. Now, once we've got that out and we've deployed it, we put a little CSS hipstery magic to it, and then run our site. And you see here we have our JSS site and our hero banner, and it looks exactly the same. So this is an example of, here's how you would have done it in MVC. Here's how you would have done it, or how you will do it now in Headless on creating components. So next up is going to be rendering variants. What do we do for rendering variants? How are those different? So first off, we'll start with the MVC side of things. We'll right click on our promo, and we're going to actually create a new component. And this time we're going to just clone it. We're not going to go through all the rigmarole. So we're going to clone promo, and this time we're going to create a component called Spotlight. And we're going to put our new Spotlight component in the SugCon module, not the SugCon Headless, because we're going to keep those separate. So we're going to put this in the SugCon page content module. And when you clone that, obviously it's going to create a copy of all the rendering parameters, because that's the option we selected. So we're going to naturally change that. OCD kicked in. So we're going to reorganize it a bit and put in the 3 fields that we want in our new Spotlight component. So we're going to have a Spotlight title, a body, and a link. Those are the 3 fields we're going to use. So we create those. And then next up, we're going to create the variant itself on the MVC side. So we're going to right click on rendering variants in the presentation section and go to our Spotlights folder that we will have created. And we're going to create 2 templates. We're going to create one called default and then one called title and link. And then under each of those, it's going to be a Scriven template. So this is an example of our Scriven templates for our 2 rendering variants. So the default template is going to display the title, the body, and the link. And then naturally, the title and link variant will just display the title and the link. Go figure. So these are our 2 rendering variants. So the Scriven template is what actually holds the markup for the component itself. Then we're going to sprinkle in a little CSS hipstery magic and put a couple of components on the page. And now you see in our MVC site, we have 2 instances of our Spotlight component, both sharing the same data source, but one using the default temp variant and the other using the title and link variant. So very, very straightforward, simple component, or simple component that's using pretty straightforward variants. But that's how you would do it in the MVC side. So how would you do that on Headless? Well, let's talk about that. Funny that you ask. Now, I could go through and explain, go through in detail how we do all that, but I think we've seen all this before, so I'll just kind of give it a little high level of what we're going to do. So first, we're going to clone promo as a Spotlight, like we did for MVC. We're going to update the templates and make sure we have our 3 fields, our Spotlight title, our Spotlight body, and our Spotlight link. And then we're going to add the Spotlight as an available rendering to the site. And now we're going to actually define our rendering variants for the Spotlight in Headless. So variants are still defined in the same section of your SXA site. It's under /presentation. But now instead of rendering variants item, it's called Headless variants. So we'll create a variant folder called Spotlights under our Headless variants. And then we're going to create two variants here, default and title and link. Now, one thing you will notice is title and link, especially, there are no spaces. So that's pretty important to know. that your variants, and you'll see in a second why this is important, but you can't have spaces in your variant names because it's going to relate directly back to a function in JavaScript. So we'll see that in a second. But so we create our two rendering, or our two variants here. Now, in this case, all we do is create the variant items themselves. There's nothing else that we have to add to the variant, because all the implementation of the variant is going to be in the Next.js component. So we're going to copy our promo component again and rename it to Spotlight. And here is our implementation of the Next.js component. So we have our fields. We've got Spotlight title, Spotlight body, and Spotlight link. Next up, we've got now the default. So that export const default, that word default correlates directly back to the name of their variant called default. But then we also have this other variant inside the same component, and we call it title and link. And you can see now why it's important that those variant definitions in Sitecore there's no spaces in them, because they need to correlate directly back to the function. So we have these are our two rendering variants for the headless component. Now, once we do this, we're going to add the new rendering to available renderings. So it shows up in the toolbox, and drop it on a page, use a couple of variants, sprinkle in a little hipster CSS flavor to it and things. And now we refresh our screen, and we see in our JSS site, we have the same thing. We have two components on the page. One Spotlight is using the default variant. The other is using the title and link variant. So those two examples are some examples of some of the everyday things that you're going to do that are going to be different between the MVC side and the headless side. So you may be asking yourself, okay, well, that sounds fine. I guess I will start to learn some of this hipstery, stuff. So what are some of the limitations if we decide that we're going to make this jump from MVC to headless? What are some of the limitations we're going to run into? Well, there are some, so I'll talk about a few of them. First off, search. All of these search components are not available in SXA. These are some of the out-of-the-box components that are not available anymore in headless. So if you're using search heavily, like I am for my customer that's migrating to headless, you will have to re-implement the search features that you use. And that's just the kind of the nature of the headless beast. These components were very, very dependent on the server-side model, and that's just different now. So none of these search components are available in headless anymore. So that's one big difference, especially for my customer, because we heavily use search. Another difference is going to be forms, and there's a couple of flavors of this. So if you're using forms and you're using server-side renderings, not static site generation, if you're using forms and server-side renderings, it kind of works. I mean, you're forced into using the REST API of the layout service instead of GraphQL, but you can make it work. However, if you're using static site generation and you need forms, that's not going to work at all. You're not going to be able to use Sitecore forms at all. So that's going to be a big limitation of going headless. So it's something to keep in mind. Personalization is also going to be different. So if you are personalizing content and you're doing server-side renderings and you're on XM, well, it kind of still works because you've got that round trip. So it kind of still works. If you're doing personalization with server-side rendering and you are using XP, well, I mean, that works a little better because now you've got, you still got XDB and all of those bits. So it kind of still works. I mean, you can make some cases there. But if you're trying to do personalization and static site generation with either XM or XP, that's not going to work at all. And it's important to note out that even using server-side renderings with Next.js is going to impact the performance of Next.js, and that's kind of one of the nicest capabilities of Next.js in particular, is how fast it is, high lighthouse scores, all of those things. So server-side rendering is going to negate a lot of that. So, you know, don't just say, oh, I've got the answer and things. You need to take this into consideration. So this is personalization with XM and XP. This has nothing to do with XM Cloud. But if you are using XM or XM Cloud and you use personalize, the actual composable product, well, that's gonna work just fine. And I mean, those are designed to work together, and that's gonna work just fine. So if you've been listening to all this and you're thinking to yourself, okay, fine, I think we can live without search components, or we're fine recreating those, and we're fine with the limitations on forms, and we're fine with personalization. If you're okay with all that and you want to still continue down this path, you may be asking, can I run Headless SXA and MVC together in the same site? You know, so that I can kind of, you know, migrate things to Headless in a slow and controllable way? Well, no, you can't do that. And it's going to be obvious in a second, because MVC runs on IIS because it's .NET. That's going to work great. Next.js usually runs on Node, and that's going to run great. But if you try to run MVC on a Node box, well, that's not going to work at all. And if you try to run Next.js on IIS, well, I mean, I guess technically that you might be able to make that work, sort of, but it's certainly not optimal. So we'll just call that a no bueno either. So that's something to consider. Now, you can run an MVC SXA site in the same instance as a headless SXA site. You can run those within the same instance. That's perfectly fine, but you cannot run them within the same site. So if you've heard all that and you're thinking, okay, I think we can still make a case for making the transition. How do you do that? How do you actually make that transition from MVC to headless? You know, with you know, speaking mainly of your content. Well, there's a few options. One of the ways is there is a way to take all of your current pages and export them to statically generated HTML files. Then you can include those in your head app, but it's kind of a one-time migration. So if you need to modify them after the fact, it's going to be, you know, you're either going to have to redo that export, or you're going to have to, you know, it's going to be pretty painful to update that. But that is an option. And if you go to this bit.ly link, there's some Sitecore documentation that talks about this, talks about how to achieve this export, what to do with those statically generated files, but it also goes into more depth about the limitations of that approach. So there are some limitations. Forms aren't going to work. Personalization isn't going to work, as a couple of examples. So check out that bit.ly link, and it'll talk more about that. So that's option one. Option two, well, we can stop everything. You know, tell the business, okay, stop. We're not going to do any new features for you or bug fixes or anything like that, and we'll call you again in 9 months when we're done, and let you know we're done, and we'll launch it, and then we'll move about our business. I doubt that many customers will go for this approach, but it is one. So wanted to point that out. So that is an option. It's probably not one that's going to be selected very often, but it is an option. The third option is one that my customer specifically is going to be using, is to take more of a piecemeal approach, is to put some sort of router, some sort of proxy out in front of both of your apps that takes the incoming request. And then you can do some routing between the pages that have been migrated to the pages that haven't, and route them to the appropriate instance or the appropriate tech stack. So if you've migrated, for instance, only the About Us page, not the home page or anything, but you've migrated the About Us page, you can say, well, if somebody hits the About Us page, send them over to the headless stack. Otherwise, send that request to the MVC stack. So that is another approach. There are some various different vendors out there that can do this. We will be, my customer, once we get down this path, we will be using Akamai for this kind of routing. I hear that while I haven't used it, I hear that Experience Edge can do this kind of routing for you. But that is an opportunity for you to migrate content in a slow and controlled manner as you have components ported over, components created, and then you're not stuck with the big bang of content migration and all that kind of stuff. So these are kind of the three options that we've, and I'm sure that there are more options on how to do this, but this is the three that we've kind of come up with. So what are some of your options for training? If you're like me, you're an old school server-side guy that can barely spell React, or didn't even know how to spell React up until about 9 months ago. What can you do to kind of train yourself up? Well, one of the things I did is I went to Pluralsight, and there were a couple of training courses that I took that I thought were really good. The first one, the React training, was fabulous. It was only about 2.5 hours or so total, but it really opened my eyes to the React side of things and how everything worked. And that was a really good foundation on which to start. And then the next course I took was more geared towards Next.JS specifically, providing a little bit more opinion to the unopinionated React implementation. So that one was a shorter training. I didn't get as much out of that as I did the React training, but these I found were both useful. And then obviously Sitecore does have their own training available also on JSS. So so this bit.ly link will take you to some learning options directly from Sitecore about getting started with JSS. So this has pretty much been my journey with trying to make a transition from the server-side based classic SXA to headless. And like I said, I am not a full hipster. I still don't understand a lot of pieces of it. It's been quite the learning curve, but I'm starting to get there. So this has kind of been my journey. So with that, I'm done. So do we have any questions?
Thank you very much, Jason. I would admit you one of the best, if not the best narrator in the entire community. So nicely you explain things and consecutively. I want to add things. So in addition to the Sitecore training you mentioned, there is also an instructor-led training. It is kind of expensive. I think it cost something around $2,000, but this is a full 2 full day training. I took the one, and it's really good. It takes you through the depths of building components with SXA, with pages, like all the development lifecycle from the code and till getting it to Vercel. So I highly recommend this training. You can get it from Learning at Sitecore group. So other than that, thank you very much for presenting. Any questions?
I had one quick question, Jason. So you mentioned that the search components, right, which were available earlier, are not available anymore in the XM Cloud or the new world. But if we happen to subscribe or use Sitecore search, would Sitecore be making this available for us?
Yeah. So if you're going to use Sitecore search, then that is certainly an option that's available for for doing some sort of site search for your implementation. I know that that's available with XM Cloud. I'm sure there's an option for use with XM. I haven't looked into that because my customer is not interested in any of the composable products at the moment. So we have just been kind of making do with re-implementing the search components ourselves, which has gone fine. But yeah, so Sitecore Search is certainly an option for your implementation. It's just on the pure SXA side, those components aren't there anymore in Headless.
Okay,
Can I
sounds
add
good. Thank you for
something?
that. Yes, sir.
So with Sitecore Search, it comes with a React SDK that works in Next.JS as well, as Next.JS is a React framework, but it doesn't provide any components that you can have in the SXA toolbox inside of Sitecore. You have to add those components yourself to your pages and create them by yourself.
It's a good point to make a distinction there.
Mm-hmm.
And I throw the link to chat with the series. There are 2 theories that exactly take you through that. So eventually Sitecore Search team released these React components, and they're really good, by the way. So go through the link if you are like a Telegram user. If you are not, well, I'll probably can extract and copy the links into chat myself. It definitely worth trying. We implemented Sitecore Search for my existing client, and I would say it was really a good experience. It was a combination of XM Cloud and Sitecore Search.
Makes sense. Thank you. And thank you, Jason, for this awesome presentation.
Oh, of course. Any other questions from anybody?
Jason, Arun here. So again, with the migration from MVC to headless JSS, let's say already an application working, it's a large application, and if we want to migrate from MVC to headless, and if client is not not able to wait so much long time to convert it, so do you still suggest to go for headless, or how can we convince the client, or is it worth to spend that much amount to move to headless?
Well, I mean, that's really a question for the customer more than anything, because whether you find value in a headless implementation versus an MVC implementation really is kind of up to you and what your future plans are. The world is certainly moving in the headless direction. It's moving in the Next.js, headless way, so you're probably going to be running into limitations on, eventually you will start to run into limitations on features on MVC-based products, things like that. So whether or not you do make a move to headless is really going to be more of a vision question for the customer and the business than it is a technical decision.
Okay,
it's already there. So I saw several features that are available, newly released. They become available only for pages, and there is no support for Experience Editor for the things, which now limits you to consume XM Cloud, which now limits you to go headless. And yes, Jason nicely said, Sitecore does not shout it loud, but headless is the only way for you to go. So it's a matter of time. Time plays against you. The earlier you start learning things, the earlier you will benefit from it. And I want to add a couple of things. So from Sitecore side of things, scaffolding is provided really well. From the Next.js codes, it could be better, and I would advise you to use some sort of snippets templating tool that will scaffold everything for you. If you want to go even further ahead, you can do like I did, like today, for example, I went to GitHub Copilot and I asked it to create me a component for carousel that will be using Tailwind, that will also should be TypeScript, and it must use use state and use effect hooks. So basically, this is client-side component. All this like set of requirements, linting requirements. It was just a sentence, and it ended up generating me the entire project structure. So it's not just component; it's just like a set of folders in component. I see component and styles. I see TypeScript settings. I see ESLint, like ready to go, and that was unbelievable. The total time to work was something under the minute. So that's more advanced way of scaffolding. So if you have access to GitHub Copilot, it's definitely the way to go.
So now it's recommended. I'm a complete backend developer, as Jason mentioned. So now it's time for us to learn front end also to become a full stack, right? That's what even the industry is looking for. Just from your opinion, any projects we take, right? People are looking for headless. It means front end plus backend experience is mandatory, right?
There's one thing I can tell you: it's time to change, and that's what we're doing. This is what this user group is entirely about this change for us Sitecore developers, and being mindful with time. I need to pass the control to the next speaker. Please welcome Jack Spector, and Jack will tell us about the rule engine and how to parse rules, and purely with JavaScript. Like without any backend. Obviously you use GraphQL, but nothing else. But I'm curious to see it myself. So Jack,
thanks, Martin.
We need to pass you control.
Yes,
so I'm making you a host, and it's entirely yours.
Thank you. Do you see my screen?
Absolutely, yes, we do.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, Martin, for inviting me. Yeah, great pleasure to present here. So today I'm going to talk about GSS personalization. But like this XM Cloud, now you expected to use Sitecore personalize, which is the right way to personalize sites in XM Cloud. However, I've decided to go another way and actually talk about Sitecore rules, which was the old way to personalize things in Sitecore, which is unfortunately not supported at the moment. So a few words about me first. So I'm working with Sitecore since version 6, which was, as you remember, originally it was using standard classic ASP.NET views, no MVC. So it's a long journey for Sitecore from classic ASP.NET to Next.JS now, which is completely different. And as you can imagine, majority of my work, I worked as the backend developer. And so this is a shift for me as well now to move to front end and use JavaScript. So don't judge harshly if I'm doing something very silly in my JavaScript implementation. So I live in Auckland, New Zealand. And yeah, it's really great that this user group is so diverse with people all around the world. So it's lots of great presentations. So first, let's talk about the Sitecore rules. So as you know, in Sitecore you have a rule engine which allows you to build the rules with this great UI. So you have an option to choose the rule. You can choose action that would execute if the rule is true or false. You can have some checks like operators, like if it's equal or not equal. So it's very flexible. You can create your own rules. You can create your own rules with parameters that would do some great things like insert options or personalization, or maybe you do some promotions on the site with custom business logic. So very useful. Unfortunately, with XM Cloud, it's not supported anymore. If you can see on the XM Cloud Experience Edge, which is being used for XM Cloud, it says that Experience Edge for XM does not execute or support Sitecore personalization rules or content testing. So what can we do about it? Should we just not use Sitecore rules anymore? The interesting thing is that if you look into the Experience Edge and make a query to your Sitecore rule field, you will find that it doesn't execute the rule. However, it does return the rule XML. And as you can see here, you have all the information about the rule here. You have the rule ID, you have condition ID, condition parameters, and action ID. So you have all the information to execute the rule. So the only thing, it's not being executed because it used to be executed on the backend. So what do we do about it? We can make our own rule parser that will execute the rule on the front end. So how we do about it? So the idea is that we will make a JavaScript rule parser that will basically, as you can see, it will parse the rule XML to get us information about the rule and all the conditions and actions and operators. And then we will have again the run rule that was parsed, and will keep the result of the rule in the context object. So how do we convert existing Sitecore rules, which are backend, into JavaScript? So for that, let's first take a look how Sitecore runs the rule on the backend itself. If you take a look of what Sitecore does, it has a rule definition under settings over here for each rule. It has its own ID as any Sitecore item, and it has this text here which allows to configure the rule with operator ID and day number, which are rule parameters. So what we are going to do is we are going to have a JavaScript function for any rule, condition, or action, and it will have the parameters in here, which we parsed from the XML, and it will execute that to basically mimic our backend implementation of Sitecore rule. And it would be very extensible, so we can create our own custom rules very easily. We will just say register a rule, or register an operator, or register a condition or action, and we'll pass the ID of the rule here, and the respectfully the function that will execute this in JavaScript. So this way, we will know how to execute this XML that we are getting from Sitecore. And the idea is that it will be very, easy to use and accessible in every Next.js application, reusable, and it will be basically an NPM package that will use one for rule engine and another for Next.js specific usage of this rule engine, like for personalization. So as you can see, as I talked before, the idea is that we can use it for personalization or A/B test or promotions, and this is really like a proof of concept that I'm building, because obviously there is a Sitecore personalized, which is already tested implementation of personalization. So there is no really good reason to use this in production, but but yeah, just a kind of prototype. So this is the rule engine that I have here, and I just wanted to showcase. So this is the rule engine implementation. Here we have a TypeScript project, and it exposes the rule engine itself. And we also have here the tests for each Sitecore rule in JavaScript. So we have dev month rule, we have general rules like and or, we have date rules, and we have request parameter rules and number operators like is equal or is it greater than, and so on. So as you can see, it doesn't cover all Sitecore conditions or operators at the moment, so just proof of concept. So here I wanted to showcase the personalization in particular. So for that, I've created a GSS SXA starter application. So very simple starter application, and here we have pages under home for client-side personalization, and this is the custom fields that I've added. So unfortunately, with Next.js on XM Cloud, we don't have this nice final layout field in the XM Cloud. We cannot go here and do the personalization here as we did before. It's not accessible anymore. So to overcome that and actually still do the personalization, just added some fields here. So first one, it says whether we wanted to run the personalization on the edge, which means like SSR and SSG mode. And another one, if it's gonna be SSR or like if it's false, basically it's a client-side personalization. And the second one, if it's SSR or SSG. So if it's a static, then it's gonna be SSG. And here we have a rule which says, so if campaign ID request parameter is equals to specials, then we go to placeholder in headless main, and we set the rich text data source to text3. Yeah, so basically, now when we go to, let's talk about the client personalization first. So how does exactly it works? So as you know, in Next.js, the way it renders the component is that it has a page props factory, which retrieves the layout as JSON from Experience Edge. And then it parses that and passes that each component props to the placeholder. And that renders the components. So you can see that in the Next.js, you can see this here. Here is this component props plugins, and you have page props plugins here. And the way it's actually renders that is through layout. So you can see the layout here, which is actual layout of the Sitecore page. And you have a placeholder, which is Sitecore component from standard Sitecore Next.js component from. However, for personalization, I've created a custom personalized placeholder, which extends Sitecore component, but what it does instead, it does exactly the same. It takes the page props factory JSON and parses that, which is takes these props which are passed from component props factory. But then what it does, it retrieves the personalization rules as additional requests from Experience Edge. It parses them and check if the rule is if there is a personalization over there and the rule is true, it will modify the props and it would render this modified props, or otherwise it will render the original presentation. So let's just take a look how it works on the actual Sitecore instance. So we have here a client-side page. So this is one. There is no personalization on Edge, so it's just client-side personalization. And we have here rich text component with data source, which is text1. And basically, if it's specials, it's going to use the text3 data source. It's this nice text. So this is how it looks. So we have, this is the default. We just come here, nothing happens, no personalization. And now we do this. And we have a personalization demo here. And you can see it happens on the client side, because if you render the site, it first renders this original data source, and then it makes the request to Experience Edge and parses that parses the data source and replaces that with another data source. So it's all happens on client side. And you can take another one here. You can just have Christmas. What was the another rule? Yeah. So not everything is good, but anyway, the next one. The next one is for SSR. So with client side, as you can see, there is a small delay on the rendering. So with SSR, the logic, the way it works is a bit different. So we are going to have SSR works with, you get a page props factory, which happens on the Next.JS edge. So you get that, and then you can inject into your page props factory pipeline from here. And we have a plugin, which is SSR personalization plugin, which injects into that pipeline, and then again makes a request to Experience Edge, parses the rule, and if there is a personalization, it will modify the props and will modify the layout before it's being passed to the SSR rendering. So here we have our SSR. And we have a specials, and you can see it's personalizes right ahead. There is no client side re-render. It happens on the server and on the edge. But that's SSR. So it's still basically every time you're making requests, it renders the layout every time, because this is how SSR works. It doesn't pre-render the page beforehand like SSG. So I thought, like, we need to do the SSG personalization as well. And as you know, like, Sitecore Personalize does that through middleware as well. So it's definitely possible. So how does it work exactly? So with SSG personalization, it's much more complicated. The way it works is you have several stages. So first stage of every SSG build is it fetches the sitemap to retrieve all the pages to render. And you can actually you can go into here and make a custom plugin for this as well. There is a sitemap fetcher that does that. And you can this is how Sitecore Personalize does that. So to do the similar stuff, I've just created a custom GraphQL sitemap service that retrieves the pages that I wanted to personalize on my SXA instance. So it retrieves that pages and it checks if there is a personalization. Then it would calculate all variants for that for that page, because like if you render a personalized page, you cannot render one variant. You need to render all the variants because that's what you're gonna show to the user, because it's pre-rendered. Yeah, so it calculates all the variants and then it adds this variance to the paths to then render an HTML. So with my instance, you can see here, this is how it looks like. It fetches the path, and then we have SSG, which is statically generated site, and we have a presentation rule here, and we have two rules applied. So the way it happens is that we have variant when first rule false, another rule is true. We have another variant when first rule is true, another rule is false. And we have a third variant when both of the rules are true. And we have also a default when no rules is applied, so both of them are false. And then it just filters them out by the one which are rendered on statically. So that's the path which is being rendered for personalization. But we now know the rules, but we have to also render them and know which rule has which personalization for the user when the user comes to the site. So for that, we basically, whenever user visits the page, we're gonna check whether we run the rule, and we identify which rule is. We're gonna run the rule for his request parameters, and we're gonna see which variant ID applies for that rule. For example, if he has a specials, if we run the rule, we see that the variant ID is the first rule was false, another one was true. So that means this is the variant we want to show for the user. And then we rewrite the path on the request, and this is what we return to the user in terms of HTML. So that's how we know which path to return, and the path we already pre-rendered here with this. This is what the all possible paths that we can return for the user. So we can. And so finally, whenever we render the page itself, we also identify when we render the variant, we identify the rules based on the rules which are exist true or false for this variant, and then we render the rules based on that for the HTML. So this is a three-stage process, but the end result is that this is the SSG page. The end result is that we get pretty much same thing, but it happens on the server, on the statically generated. So we get it straight away with no server-side requests. So basically, this is 3 implementations for this. So obviously, the client side has the fastest response time, no flickering, but we have flickering. With SSR, we have no flickering. However, we make every request for every customer visit. And we don't need that customer placeholder actually for SSR and SSG. It works for any placeholder, even the default Sitecore one, because it injects directly into Sitecore plugins. And finally, for SSG, it's the fastest possible personalization. It happens on the edge, and we pre-render the personalization beforehand. But there is a catch, because we basically generate all possible opportunities for the rules. We cannot have more than 4 rules because the number of variations grow exponentially. If we have 5 rules, then it would be 2 power 5 number of variations. I think it's like 32. And the more rules we have, the more we're gonna have variations, and then time to build these presentations, to render them, would grow and grow more and more. So 4 is kind of, common sense number that could limit to 16 variations, which is should be okay to render from the build point of view. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, this is just a prototype, just kind of play around to see how we can use Sitecore rules to run them and build them and do the personalization with them as well. So very welcome for any contributions, because there is lots of things there to extend at the moment and to cover all Sitecore existing conditions and actions and operators. And yeah, I'm still working on more case studies for this. So as one of the things I'm planning to work on is a chatbot, which will use Sitecore rules to run based on the Node.js. So yeah, thanks a lot. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much. That was a really impressive thing. And from my side, I need to rewatch it again. And I basically want to reproduce it following up to you. So for those who are on the same board as I am, there will be a recording immediately after the meeting. Not immediately, but maybe in an hour from where the event ends in the Sitecore Telegram channel. It's in the chat. But if you're not using Telegram, there will be later the month in YouTube playlist. So along with the first one. So stay tuned, subscribe. Thank you very much, Jack. Any questions from the audience? But anyway, if no questions, let's move to the following presenter. Please welcome Justin Luster. Justin works for Sitecore. I don't remember the exact title, but he is supporting the partners. And Justin will show us the revalidation approach and technique with Experience Edge. I was a room captain for that particular session at SUCON North America, and it was a really interesting session. So now it will be a revised version. So Justin, it's all yours. Jack, can you release the post, please?
Oh yeah, how can I do that?
You can pass it to Justin.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, done.
Justin, are you with us?
He's unable to unmute himself for some reason.
Hello?
I cannot unmute.
Yes, we hear you
Yes,
now.
we hear you. You are not on mute.
Testing.
Yes,
Can
we
someone-
hear you.
Okay, there we go. I don't. I can hear you now, and you guys can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Cool. Always fun dealing with headset issues. Yeah, by the way, I did have a question in there, but we can revisit that, I guess, after my presentation. I would just like to say that that was really awesome. I don't know how I'm supposed to follow up with that. Lots of interesting ideas there, Jack. So kudos
Thank
to
you.
you.
Thanks a lot.
All right, let me just share my screen. I'm gonna go ahead and share my entire screen here. Cool. Everyone can see this, right?
Yes, we can see.
If only I can. Cool. All right, hello everyone. We're going to go through what I've titled No Compromises in XMC, working with on-demand revalidation with Experience Edge. I'm obviously reusing the Cyclone deck here. So just a little bit of agenda. I'd like to interject the actual topic with a little bit of a overview on what the partner technical advisor team is. That's the team I'm a part of. We are we are partner facing, and we basically exist to help our partners succeed in the headless ecosystem. And then after that, we'll go through the actual steps of setting up our Experience Edge Webhooks to enable on-demand revalidation. All right, so first and foremost, if you have a headless project, please, please, please talk to a partner technical advisor. We have our own ticketing system. We are constantly trying to make ourselves more available on Slack. And if you have a composable project, especially if it's XM Cloud or using something like Search or Order Cloud, make sure you're talking to us. And there's a few different reasons for that. One is it's extremely likely that some of the friction points you're running into, we're able to help you through those, as well as when you do run into these very novel situations, we want to hear that feedback from you. We want to kind of use your experience selfishly, so that way we can see where the gaps are in the product and the ecosystem, and we can help facilitate that conversation, both to product and engineering. So key point here is if you have a composable project, make sure you are talking to a PTA. All right, so diving in here, before we get into the actual technicals, and we've, this conversation seems a little bit out of place considering everything we've just talked about, but I'm still going to go through it. There's certain acronyms here that are industry-wide at this point, but not everyone is familiar with them. Even if you are, you're a hardcore web developer, you're doing this all the time, there's just some terms that can catch you off guard. And the three major terms throughout this topic, and just when you're dealing with Next.js or any headless application, but especially Next.js applications, are SSR, SSG, and ISR. And if you don't know what those are, don't fret, you are not alone. Again, here's a commenter on Hacker News who was very frustrated at people using these terms. This is very much it's not fair to frame this as a get off my lawn like comment. Again, just know you're not alone. And he was making his frustrations very well known on Hacker News. So with SSR, SSR means server-side rendering. Think of this as your typical ASP.NET application. All it means is that when a user requests a web page or any endpoint on the server, that request is going to get dynamically executed in that moment. Static site generation is the opposite of that. And there's quite a few benefits here, but mainly that the site is generated upfront. When the user requests a page, it's just getting a static HTML export. And obviously, that's great for financial reasons. Building on that, from static site generation, Next.js introduces a concept called incremental static regeneration. With SSG, your entire site is static. What that means is that when you build the site, it will never change until you rebuild or redeploy your site. That means, if you have 50,000 pages and you're on Vercel, that means you have to go through all 50,000 pages and redeploy those out if you're using SSG. ISR takes the middle ground approach where you have SSG for the majority of requests, but over time, those pages get expired. That way, when a new user comes in, say after 60 minutes or something like that, a new page gets regenerated, and then that gets served to all the different users. There's also some other benefits here. Vercel and Next.js strongly lean towards ISR, and one of those things is you get instant rollbacks in Vercel versus just using SSG, which you don't necessarily get. All right, let's go through how to configure ISR in your Next.js application. But before we do that, if you're on XM Cloud and you're using Next.js, you 100% definitely should be using the XM Cloud Foundation repo. We expect to see this across all of our XM Cloud projects. It's the default project that is given to you when you set up an XM Cloud repository. And it also includes many different kind of freebies, is what I'm going to call them, but features such as multi-site, the personalized add-on, which is topical considering the last topic, SXA redirect handling and sitemap handling, as well as robots.txt, et cetera, et cetera. That is to say that if you have an XM Cloud project, use the XM Cloud Foundation repository. If you don't, you're going to have to do a lot of bespoke and custom development to match, feature parity with the repository, but also what I would consider kind of, a set of requirements that are very typical of any web application. And we've included this for you inside the Foundation repository. All right, so to configure the incremental static regeneration feature within Next.js, and again, especially in the XM Cloud Foundation repository, there's kind of a catch-all path. It's path.tsx, and in that file, you're going to be able to configure what each page is able to do in terms of regenerating statically. We do that by configuring the revalidate property, and that's going to be configured in seconds. So if you set the revalidate property to 5 seconds, that means every page is going to be cached for 5 seconds. If you set it to 60 minutes, every page will be cached for 60 minutes. Of course, and this is not something we'll cover here, you can add more kind of catch-all routes into your Next.js application if you want to set up different rules. But that's a little bit more of an advanced topic. And again, we won't necessarily cover that here, but just know that you can customize and finesse these rules out to however you need them to be. Again, just as a code example here, this is the get static props method inside that path.tsx file that comes out of the box with the XM Cloud Foundation repo. You'll see kind of a few lines down in the return statement, there's the revalidate property. That's what you want to set. When you return that revalidate property and it's not null or undefined, Next.js, again, will cache that page, and in this case, all the pages for the determined amount of time. Now, even after configuring that, there's a few considerations and complications here. The big question here is going to be, what should I actually set the revalidate property to? And that comes down to a few different things, but mainly what can content authors tolerate, right? Not just content authors, but your end users as well. Maybe you have like a breaking news page or something that can't wait 60 minutes. And that's going to have to be considered throughout, and we'll go over how to solve that here. Additionally, each time you regenerate a page, understand that you are actually calling out to all the integrations that that page has. With XMC, that specifically is including Experience Edge. And it's quite possible that when you're rebuilding a site or you're rebuilding your pages all the time, you can kind of breach the threshold of what Experience Edge has set as the default rate limit, which is 80 requests a second. So there's just a lot of different talking points and complications here. And it can also cause some internal strife when you're talking to a client. Telling a client, their authoring team that they need to wait 60 minutes for their content to get updated. That's not something that I think many people expect or really want out of their systems. And of course, again, it just causes a lot of finger pointing that I've seen. But even technically, they can cause debugging confusion. And I think even today, there was a question inside the XM Cloud Sitecore chat. It's like, hey, we're not seeing our page, regenerate, right? or it's not showing the updated content, we're having to wait 120 seconds, like what's going on? And when you get into those types of situations in a production environment, it can look a little bit like this, where, frantically, executives or content authors, want an explanation now, and you're trying to figure out which part of the system is or isn't working. Is Vercel caching the page too long? Is Experience Edge not returning the correct, content? All the fun things you have to work through. But there's a middle ground here. If you set up incremental static regeneration in Next.js, you get the quote unquote financially friendly configuration here, where your pages are statically generated and cached. That way they're not being executed on every request. But there is a way using Vercel's on-demand revalidation to say, hey, this content has been updated, or for any other reason, I want to regenerate this page now. Again, just reviewing this, ISR, incremental static regeneration, that's what the XM Cloud Foundation repo is set to use by default. It's what you should be using in a variety of different contexts. It's really easy to configure. Start with that. And then on top of that, Next.js provides a revalidate API. And that's kind of the entry point into saying, whatever the page may be, please regenerate this now. And there's also a 300 millisecond cache purge as well. That way you don't have to wait any longer than a second for those pages to get updated globally. And this is the call. It's literally just this simple. Hopefully everyone can see it here, but regardless of what you're doing, whether it's a default API call, right? So using a Vercel serverless function or anything else, the next API response has a revalidate function on it. If you call that with the correct route, that page will get generated. So anything from your homepage to blog posts to breaking news articles, et cetera, et cetera. And that's literally all you have to do. There's nothing more to it. Again, just reviewing some of this, use that revalidate call to immediately cause a cache clear / purge in Vercel. It should only take about 300 milliseconds. You can pretty much call this from anywhere as long as you have a Next API response available. And there are other ways to call this function as well, which we won't get into, but just know it's available in different contexts. And you don't even have to use this with ISR directly. So if you have a pure static site, right, using SSG, and you never, have that timeout period, whether it's 60 minutes or 3 hours or 5 seconds, whatever you set it to, just SSG, you can still use this feature, which is great. There's a few things to consider here. So even though we have that revalidate call within Next.js, how do we get that to work with XM Cloud? When we publish out from XM Cloud, how do we say, okay, now revalidate this? And how does this work with other modules and add-ons within the XMC Foundation repo? And here's a nice little diagram going over the gap. We have XM Cloud on the left side and Vercel on the right side. How do we bridge this gap? The answer here is with Experience Edge, you have Experience Edge Webhooks, which are available via the Experience Edge admin API. When you use this, when a publish happens, Experience Edge will trigger that webhook for all the different updates, and it will send out a payload to that endpoint detailing what was changed, whether it was like deleted, renamed, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what we want to use to, again, bridge that gap. So that way our XM Cloud instance and our head application, in this case, the Vercel Next.js application, understands when it needs to regenerate these pages. Just a little bit about the actual Experience Edge admin API. Beyond just adding webhooks, which is obviously what we're talking about here, there's a few different things you can do with the admin API, including updating certain cache settings around media items. You can even go so far as to delete all the content out of there if you so wish. And specifically with webhook endpoints, you have a few different kind of administrative functions here, which is listing the webhooks. You can get information about a specific webhook via ID. In our case, what we really want to concentrate on for this talk is create webhook, which we will detail here in a little bit. All right, so how do we create a webhook with Experience Edge? It's quite simple, actually. You just need to post a request to this endpoint, and you give it the URI rather of the webhook, and that's it. Then Experience Edge has that webhook. When a publish or update happens on Experience Edge, it will call this endpoint. It's fairly simple. You do need to make sure that there are different execution modes. So when you add your webhook into Experience Edge, make sure you are using the onUpdate execution mode. There are others, they're not relevant, and they will not give you the information that we need here to regenerate the page properly. Again, just reinforcing the point, definitely use the onUpdate execution mode. Don't do anything else, because we want that layout update information to come through. And there's going to be a little bit of processing we have to do here. Here's an example of a layout update being sent over. You can see here that even kind of the third operation down, while we have layout data updates, we also have item updates, and we have a delete that comes through. We need to filter out that other information because it's not relevant for the page regeneration. It might be useful in other contexts. For example, we have people that are actually using this with Sitecore Search to integrate with the ingestion API. That item update information could be quite useful there, but for our purposes, we only care about the layout data update. Just a few things to note, and we'll cover this a little bit more later. Experience Edge will send out all these updates in a batch format, just as you saw before, meaning that not only will you get about 10 pieces of information about what's been updated in a single webhook call, but you can also get multiple hits to your API endpoint. So that endpoint is going to need to continue to process those requests as they come through in order to properly regenerate everything. And again, there are things we need to ignore here for this to work properly. So before we dive into the specifics here, or really rather the demo, here's the overall recipe for using on-demand revalidation. Make sure you're using ISR in your Next.js application, although again, you don't have to. We strongly recommend you kind of take a parallel path where you have both on-demand revalidation and ISR working together to make sure you always have the most up-to-date content, while striking that balance between, again, getting your updated content and keeping your site SSG. Add the API endpoint or /webhook into the Next.js application. That way, Experience Edge has something to send that payload to. And then we register that endpoint with Experience Edge. And that's it. Just a quick live demo that we'll go through. Make sure I really wish the toolbar on Zoom would get out of my way. Does anyone have any quick tips to get rid of this? Is it pinned somewhere? Here, we'll just do this.
Control tab.
Control tab.
To circle around your tabs.
Yeah, there we go. I need to refresh. All right, so we're going to go into the Pages editor, and we're going to go to a site that I've previously set up. One thing to note here, if I just say, I'm going to update this content right now, and I'm going to say something like, actually, let me just do it here. Hello, virtual user group. And I'm going to publish this out right now. And I hopefully should be running, I believe I was running, yeah. I'm running this site locally and on Vercel right now. And what we're gonna see here is my local instance is what's in called edge mode right now. And no matter how much I update, let's do this. no matter how much I update this content, my local instance is not going to update. And right now I've disabled ISR locally just for the purposes of this demonstration, but until I've added the webhook in, it's going to stay the same. And hopefully you caught that. I had this content as K, but it needs to be updated as soon as possible. And I added the hello virtual user group text. And again, this will just stay the same forever and ever and ever. To fix this, is there really no way to like remove this? That's so unfortunate. I'm gonna have to keep doing this. So to set this up locally, I'm actually going to start a local tunnel here using ngrok. And what I'm doing here is I'm taking this application and I'm going to tell Experience Edge, call this URL, and that URL is going to call my local instance, and then it will regenerate correctly. I'm just kind of demonstrating how this can all be configured together. Get rid of this. I have included, and there will be links to this after the presentation, but I've kind of set up this really simple HTTP file for interacting with the Edge admin API. You can take a look at it and feel free to use it yourself. Just actually get rid of this. Cool. I'm going to save this. I'm now going to add this webhook into Experience Edge. Cool. We've created this. Now, once I go back to my pages editor, we should be in a position to where any type of content updates I do, completely new content that will now be updated via webhooks. Save this. We're going to publish it out. And while we're waiting for this to publish, it can typically take, about a minute for this to come through, and we'll see a bunch of log messages here if everything has been set up correctly. One thing to note here is when you're using Experience Edge Webhooks, whether it's for on-demand revalidation or anything else, we do strongly recommend you have some type of either message queue or service bus that is able to process these webhooks and handle kind of failures or retries, et cetera, et cetera. Even with a simple setup, there's kind of a danger here without any type of message queue or message bus to sit in front of the kind of webhook requests. If you integrate this directly into Experience Edge and there's a large, and I mean a large amount of updates that come through, your revalidate endpoint that we're using here can actually time out. And what Experience Edge will do is actually call that endpoint multiple times, and that's just not a situation you want to get into. Especially like on a Vercel that can eat up your, consumption costs, which again, we just don't want to do. So do consider, even though in this example, I'm setting up the API endpoint directly here, do add something in front of this endpoint to actually process those retries and failure modes. It's the endpoint. And right now, again, we've published and we're kind of just waiting for the call to come through just to see the update. Actually, before you just list out the webhooks here. Let's make sure I added that correctly. Oh, there we go. So what we just saw happen here is, again, we published out, we added the webhook into Experience Edge. I'm using a tunneling software here. That way Experience Edge is actually effectively calling my local instance. And I'm calling the revalidate property locally. And if we go over here, we should see updated content. And there you go. And I also have this set up on Vercel itself. So let's see if this has been called yet. Yep. And inside Vercel, when these webhooks get processed, you can actually see the revalidate happen. Right here, we have our API revalidate endpoint. And then these head requests are actually the revalidate call itself, internally calling out to the page to regenerate itself, and then storing the output of that inside Vercel's cache. And there we go. I didn't mean to start from the beginning. Just to kind of, at a high level, here's what this visually looks like on what we did. We have our XM Cloud instance, which publishes out to Experience Edge. And then from there, we added our webhook. Once it gets, invoked because there is a layout update, that's going to call our Vercel function, which at this point is the API revalidate call. And from there, it's going to process each of those pages individually that Experience Edge is telling us about via the layout data update. And we call our revalidate function, and our pages get regenerated. This presentation, again, I have these kind of nifty / quirky / cute QR codes. I can send these links out in the chat. They were designed for everyone to kind of look at the screen and scan with their phones. Hopefully they work over presentation. If not, again, I'll make all this available. One thing to note here is if you're part of, if you're a partner right now, right, we are going through the Sitecore Accelerate program. So I've gone over a pretty basic example today, and even going over some of the limitations with, you need the service buses, the message bus / message queue in front of the revalidate API call. There are other topics here that we didn't cover, things like multilingual setup. Those will be covered in the upcoming Sitecore Accelerate recipes. So do keep your eyes and ears open for that. That's it.
Thank you very much, Justin. My question is, have you tried the same approach with Netlify?
They're actually working on that revalidate functionality right now. And this was a topic I had actually discussed with them a few months ago, but it's currently in beta, quote unquote, according to them. Now, that might actually be out-of-date information, but they are working on making sure it's supported. Right now, the revalidate functionality, if you're using Netlify, is only a Vercel thing with Next.JS, but Netlify will be supporting it eventually, according to them. Don't hold me to that. I can't control it.
Question for SSG. If you invalidate that cache, does it render that page right away, or only when the first user will hit that page?
With ISR, you actually have two modes. There's blocking and non-blocking. And to answer your question, depending on which mode you choose, with blocking, if a user visits a page that's outside that time period, right? So the cache is expired, it will immediately regenerate the page. And then to that user that just requested the page, return the updated layout. If you use non-blocking, that means that the user that visited that page will still get the expired version of that page, but Vercel will regenerate the page in the background. So you have two modes there, and I can actually, pretty sure I can show you.
But if you revalidate the page, what's happened? Is it at the next request, or?
Oh yeah, again, it's an immediate. If you revalidate the page, I might have misunderstood the question. If you call that revalidate function, that is an immediate cache purge across like everything that Vercel hosts globally. It's a 300 millisecond cache purge. So the next user that visits that page will get the updated data. And to be clear, go ahead.
Justin, is there an advantage of using the XM Cloud Webhooks versus the XM Edge Webhooks versus the XM Cloud CM webhooks or item published event handlers to revalidate?
Yeah, I know this is something the team is working on. The team responsible for that. But the answer right now is that the Experience Edge webhooks are the most accurate webhook, meaning that the XM webhooks that you were referencing, like the publish in, et cetera, will get triggered before the update actually happens on Experience Edge. So if you use those, what will happen is you'll see, oh, publish in, I can go, regenerate my page, and then that page is going to call out to Experience Edge, but the data won't be updated quite yet. So yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Not a question, but more like a consideration. What I'm thinking is how, despite it's not directly related, but how that would work with server-side components, because those, from what I know in the latest Next.JS, they are using aggressive caching, and it's difficult to revalidate them.
Yeah, are you talking about like the new suspense stuff? Or am I miss?
No, it's not about suspense. It's about the components themselves. So there are lots of directives. There are, I think, 3 or 4 ways how you can enforce revalidation, but they are not actually working in a good way. And this is known to Vercel. They basically admit that. I'll probably drop you a link into the chat so that you guess what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Did I miss any questions during the yeah, be kind to me. During the talk that was in the chat that I might have missed? Doesn't look like it. Yeah. Also, yeah, Liz Nelson is good people to talk to. Very knowledgeable.
So I send the link to chat. Also, I would like to encourage everyone who would like to present on the next event. It will be December 14th. Reach out to me with your topic and we will see where we can take it. We're always open for speakers. Questions to Justin? If no, then I would call it a day. Thank you very much for attending this Headless user group today. This time we managed to fit into 3 hours, which is a good sign. And see you next time. Goodbye.